Dòng em ơi. Làm trụ luôn, trụ luôn, trụ luôn, trụ luôn. Trụ luôn, trụ luôn, trụ luôn. Ăn được trụ, ăn được trụ, ăn được thoải mái luôn. Dòng lên em, dòng lên, dòng lên, dòng lên, dòng lên, dòng lên. Ai chơi game sau mời nha, like, share cho mình nha.
Today we also have Julien Laurent on and Peter Walton to talk about the handball that was or wasn't. We will get to that shortly. But first, the reactions in Paris, even worse. 2 years after the remontado, the unthinkable has happened again. The headlines in L'Equipe as PSG contrived to crash out of the Champions League almost in an unthinkable manner, losing 3-1 at home to Manchester United. And Julien, I know you've been asked to rake over the coals quite a bit today. Well, we are going to continue to ask you to do that. First of all, just talk us through how the 90 minutes went from your perspective.
From my perspective, it was just an absolute nightmare. I was quite confident at the start of the game, and then the first mistake after 111 seconds by Thilo Kehrer, and then you knew from then on that it was going to be a very uncomfortable game, because you knew that this PSG team in itself had the potential of crumbling like they did 2 years ago. You could see that some of the players still had that in their minds, and it was something that unless they were getting clear and at 1-1 or then leading 2-1 maybe, or even going back to 2-2, unless that happened, then they would be very vulnerable towards the end, and they would let themselves exposed and in danger of conceding a third goal and going out. And it's exactly what happened. It's just that I've been so much with that club through the years, as a kid, as a teenager, everything you want. I never thought it could get worse than 2 years ago, and yet they still managed to do it, and it was worse than 2 years ago because it was at home, because United was so weakened by all the injuries, and because this PSG team was so disappointing, so weak mentally, with so many mistakes from players to the manager to the whole club. I don't know what to say, but this is going to be a scar that will last for a very long time.
Have you been able to come up with any sort of explanation 24 hours on, Jules? Where does the fault lie for you, first of all?
I think there are many reasons. I think if we start with Thomas Tuchel, who did a lot of things right this season, I think the last 30 minutes of the game he was too much of a passenger, and he was not proactive enough in his coaching. He let things unfold in front of him and not really did anything about it, which I thought was a big mistake. Then the players obviously have to take a lot of the blame. I think and it's not a new issue, but there's a problem of leadership in that team that has been there for a very long time. It's a team that like leaders, and when you sign Gigi Buffon to help you going through to the next level because of his experience, because he's supposedly a leader, and he cost you the game in the way he did yesterday with having one save to make, and that's all he had to do, one save, and he fluffed it the way he did, that obviously doesn't help you. I think there was a bit of complacence, and I think mentally there's an issue there as well. I still cannot believe that since 2 years ago and the game at Barcelona, no one at this club thought about, you know what, let's just bring in a psychologist. No one might need him, and he might be sat there in an office and no players or no one from the staff will go and see him and have a chat. But I just think it would have done any harm to anyone to have someone there where players could have been able to talk to before a game like the one last night, and saying, you know what, I still think about what happened 2 years ago, I still go there at times, I still have that fear in me sometimes in a similar situation, but yet no one has ever thought about that.
Craig,
well, we could always have a psychologist before our show. But I feel like that sometimes.
Not to be devil's advocate and get you going, but is there not an argument that PSG were not just extraordinarily unlucky? Is that a valid argument? Because I have read that argument in some.
Well, I must have missed that.
No.
Well, you're not unlucky when Kehrer makes an early error. You're not unlucky when a goalkeeper that you've brought in, who's been one, if not the best in his pomp, makes a horrendous error. And you're not unlucky in having, 70% possession and having 4 efforts on target in the space of 90 odd minutes against, and Gilles touched on the injuries, against effectively a Manchester United reserve side. So, some people may think, and we know we're going to get to the penalty, some may think that was unlucky, but there's been a lot of football being played before we got to that stage. When you've got Kylian Mbappe, who is no doubt one, if not the most talented kids on the block, on the planet, when he's going through one-on-one and he's slipping and he's falling over and he's hesitant, that's not unlucky. You know, poor finishing. So I don't think there's any sympathy here for Paris Saint-Germain.
I'm not having any sympathy for PSG at all, but on the one hand, I can see how somebody fashions an argument that this was unlucky, because up until, 3 or 4 minutes to go, PSG were going through. The trouble is, when this keeps happening year after year, at some point you've got to say, this is a problem with the club. This is not about bad luck. This is not about one decision going to VAR that went against you. This is not about one young right back making an errant decision or an experienced goalkeeper slipping. This is about a club that has their demons, that they have not buried, as Jules rightly pointed out, and it keeps coming back to haunt them. You spend all this money and packing that dressing room with an incredible amount of talent, yet that team has absolutely no backbone and absolutely no leadership, as Jules rightly pointed out.
The thing for me, this game for PSG should have started after the final whistle at Old Trafford. Because the players, you can blame the manager, manager's got to prepare them, of course he has. When you're in the dressing room, going to the leadership question, you get around each other and you say, lads, remember what happened at Barcelona. This is never going to happen again. Look at the team that they've got out. We can bury this team. If we are correct in our defensive blocks, if we are creative going forward, and this can be done in the lead up to the game. They came out, PSG came out, I didn't recognise this team. They were easy, tapping, it doesn't matter, this, that, and that. They kept Man United in this game. Yeah. Purely and simply, for me, because of their attitude. It was dreadful.
I'm not going to go down the sort of bottle-it line which I went down yesterday, and I'm not backtracking at all. You can agree or disagree, but I think history will show you that they've not got the job done against the bigger teams or at a later stage of this competition. There's no getting away from that. I think what was poor from them was they didn't manage the game properly as it started to get into the latter stages. They didn't manage a Manchester United side that was weak, that was there for the taking, and they didn't manage the defensive side of the game. They shouldn't have been having to block shots from the edge of the box deep into the game, whenever it was, 90 minutes or injury time. It should have been home and dry by that point, but it wasn't, and it wasn't quite the arrogance of Real Madrid the night before, but I kind of got a feeling as the game was going on that PSG thought, well, we'll keep possession, we'll see the game out because Man United are not going to trouble us, and it came back to haunt them.
Julian, we got a little taste of the reaction in France, the L'Equipe headline, even worse. Give us some sort of sense as at the bigger picture, the bigger reaction.
Yeah, I think it's been a big hangover, really, since last night from the fans who were clearly, and you can understand why, very upset and unhappy. Then looking for, who's responsible, really, a bit what we've been doing for the last 10 minutes, and it's been similar in French media. Yes, you could blame the referee for the VAR decision, and we're going to talk about that. Some people think it was a penalty in France, others don't. But like we've been saying with the boys, there were mistakes made a long time before that, and too many mistakes at that level against a reserve team from United. And United, good on them, they qualified. I'm a bit better, I have to say, because I didn't feel they play. I think they parked the bus, and PSG gifted them 3 goals and the qualification and the win. But good on them, and I hope they go as far as they can in that competition. But this is a game that PSG lost more than a game that United won, really. And then I think decision will be made at the club, not so much now, but they're going to try to cool their head down, everyone. I'm not sure if the sporting director will still be there next season, Antero Henrique, because the transfer windows under him have been pretty dreadful. I'm not even sure Nasser El Khelaifi, the chairman, will keep his place, because he's been pretty poor as well in the last 12 to 18 months. So there's a lot of issues, like we said, to address and to sort out at the club in terms of players, in terms of the administration as well, and all around as well. It's something striking that since the Qatari owners arrived, they wanted to cut off the past completely. And I know PSG is not an historical club like Manchester United, for example, and not has as long history as United, but they've done loads of things before the Qataris owner. There was a club there before Zlatan and before the Qataris, but yet they want to cut that off, and there was no former players pretty much invited last night when Sir Alex Ferguson and Eric Cantona and Patrice Evra were all there with United. And I think, again, that shows you, like Shaka said, that the problem is also inside that club, not just inside the dressing room.
Whatever else happened, it all turned on that late penalty decision, didn't it? Reactions have been strong to that. Neymar, of course, disgraceful. Four guys who know nothing about football watch a slow-motion replay in front of the TV. It was nothing. What can Kimpembe, do with his hand while his back is turned? Go bleep yourselves. Thomas Tuchel, for a shot that was going 50 metres over the bar to get a penalty from 11. There's no logic in that. That was the PSG manager, and the president also weighed in. Al Khalifi saying, for me, it was not a penalty. It is very easy to make a decision like that against PSG. It's very difficult to make a decision like that against another team.
I mean, that's ridiculous.
Well, let's get into it. Peter Walton. So Peter is with us. So he everywhere on British TV yesterday saying that you thought definitively, without a shadow of doubt, it was a penalty. Explain your thinking for us.
Well, first of all, if you look at the law that covers handball, it's very subjective and it's open to debate. It talks about movement, it talks about distance, it talks about a deliberate act. I was at a meeting in January with the head of UEFA's refereeing, Roberto Rossetti, and he said his interpretation of the law, as it stands at the moment, is that if the arms are removed from the body, his referees in the Champions League will give a penalty kick if it strikes it. Now, we can go back to the Schalke Manchester City game, where there was a similar incident where a penalty was given, and likewise last night a penalty was given. Now, the player Kimpembe, he knew where the ball was coming because he had eyes on the ball. Even though he's turned his back, you can see he's looking at the ball. He's dangled his arm outwards, making his body bigger, if that's the case that we're talking about. And for me, that was a deliberate act, and it was no surprise when the VAR intervened and said to the Slovakian referee, you better have a look at this. So, and again, it was no surprise when he overturned his own decision.
So, Peter, why would some of your former colleagues then, like Mark Halsey and Mark Klagenberger, come out and said, well, VAR shouldn't have been used?
Well, they were not at the meeting that I was at in January with Roberto Rossetti when he was echoing the thoughts that he's already given to the clubs, so the clubs know his interpretation as well. They wasn't there, and they were giving their own interpretation on what is a very loosely worded law in the laws of the game. And it's very open to subjectivity and interpretation. Roberto was being quite specific when he said when his referees will see this, they will give a penalty kick. And they did. So my colleagues, they've put their own interpretation to it, but that's the wrong interpretation for the Champions League this year.
Well, we asked you guys what you thought, and it was pretty definitive right from the start that we opened this poll out. The percentages didn't really change. 60% saying yes, the officials and VAR got the handball call right. 40% saying no.
There's a lot of ignorance out there, and even amongst some former referees, as Peter explained. And, we all sort of bash a referee or an official now and again when they make a horrendous error. But I tell you what, and I'm going to stick up for officials here, no one knows the laws of the game better than the top officials. Right. No one, right? That's what they're drilled and trained to do for years. They work their way up from grassroots to the top, to being FIFA registered referees and assistants. No one knows the law better than them. Now, there's always an interpretation of the law, and that's where it becomes subjective. But for constantly owners and chief execs and current players to come out and try and say that referees know absolutely nothing is nonsense, right? Because they know more than us sat here. Now, the penalty itself, I thought, was a clear penalty once we saw the replay, for the very reason, and I've heard a lot of nonsense about, well, he had to protect himself. Well, just because he turned his back is not a reason. When you turn your back, and you're told not to do this as a kid, and when you see players on the wall for a free kick, they're stood straight, right? Yeah. They know they're probably going to get hit, but they're stood straight, not stood with the back turned. Now, when you turn your back on a strike, straight away, your arm comes out as a natural movement, right? And once that arm's out, it's now affecting the flight in the direction of the ball because it's in an unnatural position. So because you've moved into an incorrect position,
then so has your arm. Once it strikes that arm, then you're in the lap of the gods. And as Peter Walton has explained, the directive from the UEFA officials is when it's in that position, it is a penalty kick. And I think for me, that is why they got it absolutely spot on.
I think you were saying, Paul, weren't you, when you saw it happen live, first instinct was it wasn't a penalty.
My first instinct was, you know, I went, ooh, because in the modern game, as Peter says, it's probably going to go to VAR. And when that happens, there's so many aspects, as Craig has alluded to, there's so many aspects in this. Why did he turn his back? Did the players, I'm assuming, Peter, that the players had got the directive saying, look, this is going to be a handball situation. So he knew what he was doing, the kid.
Yeah.
Now, most players just stand up and take what they call it, take one for the team. Take it in the chest, take it in the face. He didn't do that. So as soon as they went to VAR, I think it's soft, but I think it's a pen.
Yeah. Shaggy?
Without question, it was a pen for me. I think I'm like the boys here. First view, I wasn't sure. I thought Dalal was appealing for a corner kick. But from the time you see the slow motion replay, the very first one, the very first look, without question was a pen.
There's a lot of people out there saying, or there's some saying, well, it's not clear and obvious because the referee didn't see it, so they shouldn't go to VAR. Just because the referee maybe didn't
That's why you have VAR.
or see it,
Because
is exactly the reason why you have help. Not
Right.
because, oh, well, the referee didn't see it, so we can't go back. Sometimes a referee has either blocked, has a poor angle, or just blatantly doesn't see it.
It just happened so quickly,
Yeah,
as
right.
it did with us.
You know what's also interesting in this, Jules? There seems to be a bit of a continental divide in terms of the reaction. We've seen former pros in France and Germany saying definitively it was a penalty, and their counterparts in England saying it wasn't.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to hear, for example, you know, some of the boys here in England, Rio Ferdinand, Michael Owen, saying it's definitely not a penalty. If you've played at that level, you could understand why Kimpembe jumps the way he does, and it's not deliberate, and all of that. I think all the arguments are quite valid. To be fair, I thought it was. I saw the handball straight away. I didn't need the VAR in front of my television. I said I'm sure he's going to give it if he reviews it, and he did. I can see why he's harsh, and I can see why Thomas Tuchel says, but the ball is going way over the bar, and yet you get a penalty. I can see all the arguments. I've got no problem with that. I just think the law is not that clear, and they're going to make it clearer for next season, and that's a great thing. But it's just a shame for PSG that they were the victim of that sort of subjectivity, like Peter said.
So, Peter, with these rule changes coming, I know they're all theoretical so far, but we've got a pretty good understanding of what they are. With those IFAB rule changes, would that still be a penalty? With deliberate taken out?
Detailed descriptions of the law that David Ellery, the IFAB technical director, said will be issued possibly as early as next week on handball. Handball itself won't change really, and I think the decision was given last night would be the same come 1st of June when those laws are amended. One element that you'll hear is this natural silhouette, the silhouette of the body. So what IFAB, the lawmakers, are trying to do is to explain why a handball is given when the arm is at a natural position or an unnatural position, as we talk about. So you'll see some more detailed understanding and interpretation probably early next week from IFAB. But for next year, I think that still would be a handball.
Well, a day of mourning for sure in Paris. Money can buy you plenty of stuff. It cannot buy you the Champions League title. That is the lesson for PSG, who've spent over $1 billion chasing it since 2011 and have exactly 0 trips past the quarterfinals.